Hello, everyone, and welcome to Future Nonprofit, a podcast and YouTube channel where we sit down with industry experts, both in and out of the nonprofit space, to talk about how to build and scale the nonprofits our world needs tomorrow. I'm your host, Ted Vaughn, the co-author of Culture Built My Brand and the co-founder of Historic Agency. If you have not yet checked out the audio version of Future Nonprofit, it is a highly produced, amazing 20 to 30-minute journey through each of our guests' stories. Be sure and check that out. Like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts or here on YouTube. And I hope you really enjoyed today's episode. We talked to some amazing people. If you had to explain to a 5-year-old what you do for a living in just a very simple one-sentence way, what would you say to that 5-year-old?
I think I would tell the 5-year-old that I get to help people get to know Jesus.
I like that. Cut past all the organizational bureaucracy right to the heart of the mission. That's awesome.
Exactly. Otherwise, you could get into I sit in front of a screen and I type a lot and I talk to a lot of people.
Yeah. I know that's depressing when you actually start thinking about how our time is actually spent in like real life.
It used to bother me. It used to bother me more, but now I realize like a lot of times that conversation, that dialogue that happens, whether it's in person or it's through text, I mean, that is the work. That is what's allowing things to happen. So if that's the method that we need to use, then let's use it.
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts on that. Yeah, I completely agree. Okay, next kind of icebreaker question. I'm not sure, is music a part of your life? Is it a significant part of your life? Do you listen to music? Are you interested in music?
It's a huge part of my life.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes, I listen to music, and I also I enjoy making music.
Oh my gosh, what do you play?
Yeah, so I play keys, I play violin and viola, and I probably my most practiced instrument is my voice. So I sing quite a bit, and that's been a part of pretty much my whole life.
Did you want to major in music when you were younger?
I thought about it, and in fact, I looked at doing a music minor when I went to college. And at the time, well, this is a whole other long story, but let's just say there were an awful lot of 0 credit classes they wanted you to take to get a music minor. And I thought, I don't have time to do all of this at the same time. I really thought at one point God might call me into a music career. And I can see now where that probably would not have been the best fit for me just personality wise. But it's still a huge part of what I love. And today, I really love to be a part of worship leading in my church and getting to help people enter the throne room in that way.
That's so amazing. We won't spend a long time here, but I have a daughter at Berklee School of Music in Boston on a scholarship, and she's a prolific songwriter, just kind of mature beyond her years in her ability to articulate and sing and write complex melodies. And she's dating a drummer. So it's terrifying. An aspiring songwriter dating a drummer, right? Like,
so they've got the start of a band. They need to get really close with a guitar player and a bass player, and they're pretty much set.
Yeah. And my early years were leading worship in a church professionally. I did that for a Presbyterian church with an amazing mentor, Dr. Roberta Hestenes at Presbyterian Church
Wow, that's wonderful.
Well acquainted with the role of the keys and how important. And then I used to orchestrate too. I would write like string parts for different groups, and so we would have. It was amazing. I loved it. I loved that season of life.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
I think music makes you a more whole-brained person. I think there are a few activities in life that integrate both hemispheres of the brain in ways as unique as music, dance. So a few other activities, but music is, I think, top-notch.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, well, that icebreaker question went in a totally different direction. I usually what we ask is if you were walking into a big room to speak and you had to have a piece of music kind of accompany you or open up for your talk. What would you have? And we've heard everything from, Flight of the Bumblebee to hip hop to like. What?
Oh, I'm imagining Flight of the Bumblebee now, and that sounds really strange.
A little frenetic. I know.
I don't know. What's funny is it took me a really long time to get comfortable speaking in front of people, and so today I'm very comfortable with that. But for many, many years, I would have said, if I could be behind a curtain and speak, that would be the maybe not call attention to me, but
Right. Like Oz.
exactly. I don't know. I like a lot of good, dramatic movie music. Maybe something from
me
Lord of
too.
the Rings or
Yeah. Have you heard the soundtrack from The Mission?
Yes.
That is just such a haunting. To me, film score is the new classical genre.
Yes.
The harmony is the complexity, the drama. I don't think we'll ever regain Bach and Beethoven and Mozart, but I think film score is, doing a good job of building on those foundations.
I would agree. Yes. So good.
Okay. Well, those are wonderful icebreakers. I feel like we've already started. So let's start with the origin story. It's always interesting to me to hear how some piece of someone's upbringing tethers directly to who they are. Well, obviously who they are today, but sometimes very explicitly connected to what they're doing or the cause they're crusading for. Or what's some significant moments about your origin story that you remember, a profound people that have shaped you, just moments that go back to your youngest years?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of things that come to mind for me. I was raised in a Christian home and raised in the church, and so there was always sort of an expectation that I would follow that I would be in the Bible. But I was really raised in a tradition that was perhaps these days we would say much more legalistic, much more fundamentalist. And there are people that find a lot of value in that kind of faith tradition. But for me as a kid growing up in that, it really made me feel like God was watching everything I did, waiting to punish me at any given time. And so that created a lot of stress for me, actually. And I was always afraid that I was doing something that was going to damage my salvation or that would make God mad. And it really wasn't until I got to college and I started to try to figure out faith for myself and figure out I really did believe in Jesus. I believed in what Jesus did for me. But what did I actually believe about the Bible, about church? And as I started to explore some of those different things and then got to see faith through different faith traditions, through different readings of the Bible, it opened my mind and my eyes to the fact that actually there was a whole love story that was written in Scripture, and that there was so much more that I had missed coming at it from a position of fear. And the more curious I got about Scripture, the more that God became real and just completely shifted the way that I thought about my faith. And so I can see now, looking back, that really God was prepping me for being involved in Bible ministry. Now, interestingly enough, another thing that I didn't realize until after the fact, when I was in middle school, I went through this phase where I have no idea why. Looking back, I have no idea why. But I started writing to all of the embassies in all of these different countries, and I asked them to send me materials on the countries. And they sent me back all sorts of things, all sorts of different like art books and tourist things. And I would just sit and I would pore over all of these different global experience types of things. I remember one book in particular from India. It was just beautiful. And I would just spend hours looking at all of that. And I had no idea that God was going to call me into US-based global ministry. But looking back, I can see the love that God was already giving me for people all over the world.
A lot of people I've talked with who have been on that journey of faith becoming their own, whatever that faith is in or looks like, it becomes very personal and real and no longer just an extension of their family or their, origin story in terms of when they were a child. There's a significant teacher, professor, mentor, coach, somebody external from home who plays a key role in that. Was that the case for you?
I think more so in the reading sense. I read a ton. I read so much as a kid, and I started to read a lot of different things. And so, I think some of the influential writers for me, N.T. Wright was really influential for me. I think, oh goodness, I'm blanking on his name. This is terrible. Tim Keller. Tim Keller was really influential for me. and just starting to see faith through some of those different perspectives. Oh, and the other interesting thing is when I went to college and as I started, I ended up majoring in history, and I ended up taking a number of classes that were religiously based. So I took a church history class, just out of curiosity. And I learned an awful lot through that experience as well, getting to look at some of the early church fathers and just seeing some of their different perspectives. So I think a number of those things were really influential for me.
Was growing up for you fairly calm, steady, stable, or were there moments of serious disruption or trauma or instability?
So I would say no, not stable. So I had stable parents, but we did have some significant family trauma that took place. And in fact, just within our close family, there was a murder that took place between family members, and so that was around when I was 10, and that really impacted me for a number of years. Just trying to wrestle with what had happened and what it meant. I had a lot of fear that came out of that experience, and God really had to work through that experience of fear into faith and then into forgiveness through that process. So there were a few things like that, some that I can talk about, some that I can't talk about, that really disrupted our family network. So we didn't have, when people would say, oh, I've got these cousins and I've got, we really didn't because of some of these things that had happened. And we really just had my parents and I was an only child. And that was also quite influential for me. And I also think that's part of what drove me into books quite a bit, is just looking for relationship and finding that through the characters and stories.
I find in my life and in the lives of a lot of people I speak with that trauma or things that happen, and it is trauma because you can't control it and it's incredibly scary, right? So for me, it was my parents getting a divorce at the age of 6, and I was an only child. And I don't have a lot of childhood memories, but I can remember vividly what I was wearing, what it smelled like, what it looked like when I found out about that. And that trauma is I want to say always, but I was told never say never, never say always. But is often redeemed or shapes who you are today, right? Like I can think back to strengths I have today tethered directly back to that moment and how I've had to navigate and how God's used that in a redeeming, redemptive way. What about you? I mean, only child, it sounds like there's a lot of stuff that you can and cannot talk about when it comes to this instability. How has that been shaped or used in ways that have been redeemed and a part of your life today?
Well, one of those, actually going back to the music question, one of the ways was that I feel like God allowed me to process a lot of that through music, because of how our nuclear family responded to some of this trauma. We didn't go to therapy, we didn't respond to it in probably the best ways looking back on it today, and we didn't talk about a lot of those feelings and those things. And so I felt like music became a way for me to process, first with just instrumental music, and then I got into songwriting. And was able to take those things to the Lord, and in some cases to even scripture, things that I saw in the Psalms, for example, and those places where in the Psalms that the writer is expressing things that we would say, like, is it okay to say these things to God? And I felt those things, and I thought if they could express them to God through the Psalms, then it's okay for me to process some of those things through music. And so that was particularly helpful for me. I think the other thing that it did for me is it really shaped the way that I wanted to think about family and how important it was for me that if God gave me a family, that it was really important that we have a stable, just really well-adjusted family life. And you can't control everything, right? So there have definitely been moments as my daughters are growing up that I've thought, okay, Lord, please let nothing happen to them this year. It's just so that we can get past this particular age where this thing happened for me. And God has been really gracious in that. But just being able to give them an experience that I didn't have, and for my husband and I to provide that stable foundation has been really important to me.
Yeah, I can so relate to that. That's so great. And let's talk a little bit about now your education and your career journey. It's interesting because you are an incredibly, forgive me, I know you're going to blush at this, but you're very successful. You're in a significant role of leadership and influence and authority. You've had this amazing journey You're very well educated. And often there are, I think, maybe stereotypes or challenges or friction around women in faith-based roles, aspiring to that kind of leadership. What's your mindset around growth and education and leadership, and how has that kind of propelled you forward on your career journey, even going back to your early college days?
Well, at the beginning, I really had no clue what I was supposed to do with my life. And in fact, I actually started college. I was on the pre-vet track because I thought I was going to be a veterinarian. And then I realized about a semester in, I was like, why am I doing this? Do I really want to spend my life with sick, dying animals? Not really. And so then I started to just sort of cast about thinking, okay, God, if it's not that, like, what is something that you've given me an interest in that I'm willing to study more? And that was where history came in for me. While I was in the history program, I started to run into people who had combined, they said, I'm getting a history degree, but I'm going to go on and get an MBA because I want to use the history degree to really understand how people think. And I never thought about the value of a history degree for that it really is showing you the patterns that people get into, the ways that our choices have consequences, good and bad. And so you learn a lot of that through studying all of these different historical backgrounds. And again, I got exposed to a lot of different global history through that as well. But even at the end of that, I didn't want to get an MBA. I kind of actually went back and forth with my parents on this. They were feeling like I should, pursue something I think that would give me more stability. and I had, at that point, I'd gotten a job at Staples as an operations manager, and I thought, I'll grow up in this retail experience, and maybe that I can get promoted. And but I finally said, okay, I'll put my application in. The very last hour of the last day, they'll take them, and just if I get in, then maybe God's saying I should go. So I got in, and went through the MBA degree. And in the middle of that, I felt strongly that God was telling me to quit my job, and I kind of argued with him a little bit because I didn't have another job yet. And so it's like, God, you don't do that. But my husband Tim and I, we prayed about it. We said, okay, let's do it and see what happens. And I went about 2 months, couldn't find a job anywhere, tried to go be a teacher. I had the history degree. I was certified to teach, and got turned down to be a teacher, got turned down to be a substitute teacher with a bachelor's degree in history. When does that happen? And right about the point where I had totally given up on where to even look, I went to worship practice at my church, and there was someone who came in that wasn't even scheduled to be there. And she said, hey, the place where I work's hiring. Does anybody need a job? And I was like, and that was my introduction to Wycliffe Bible Translators, where I started as a typist. And from that point forward, that is really where God opened up the door for me in terms of Bible ministry, in terms of leadership opportunity, all things I had never imagined for myself. I had not aspired to. I couldn't even know how somebody like me could be used in Bible ministry. And what was really great about the experience at Wycliffe, and I spent 22 years at Wycliffe, is that they saw things in me, and they built into my potential, and they gave me the opportunity to keep raising up to the next level of leadership, even into positions that historically had not been held by somebody who came in with my qualifications, or, it's a missionary organization. I was paid staff in a missionary organization, so there's some complications there about what roles you can have. And they kept letting me move up to that next level of leadership in spite of those realities. And so over those 22 years, I went from typist to chief operating officer, where I spent my last 5 years in that, and really felt extremely well supported.
And you started the opportunity there just because you needed a job. It wasn't like you saw a career path.
No.
It was somebody, you raised your hand and said, yeah, I'm interested in a job. And all of a sudden.
Yeah, I really thought, I thought I would finish my MBA and then God would tell me what he wanted me to do with my life, which, it was true, but I was already there.
First of all, going back to the childhood question, was there something, you're ordering these books from embassies, it almost feels like to me you had the travel bug or the desire for a bigger, broader world than perhaps what you were growing up in. What did you want to be when you grew up? When you were a kid? Like, I wanted to be a stuntman because I watched a show called The Fall Guy with Lee Majors. What did you want to be when you were growing up? What was your kind of vision for yourself?
I went through a few different phases. At one point, I thought I wanted to be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. And so, I looked up to her and I thought, that's something that I could do. Apparently, at some point, I wanted to be a lawyer. I found a paper where I had written that down. I don't remember that now. That seems, I love a lot of lawyers in my life, but
you
that is not
dodged a
me.
bullet.
And really towards the end, I thought I might be a musician. I thought I might, I actually thought I might write music for movies. That was a big interest for me at one point. So I kind of was all over the map.
Was there a point in your earlier, more youthful years that you said, I want to be the president. I want to be a CEO. I want to be blank. Like, did you ever aspire to be this kind of like top tier general leader, business person? Was that ever a vision that you had?
No, not at all. So I'll come back to that question. I want to go back to what you said about just sort of women in ministry for a minute.
Sure, please.
One of the things that was influential for me growing up is the denomination that we went to church in when I was growing up did not allow women to preach from the pulpit. And my mom was a singer, and she would do concerts and she would speak in between the songs. And at one point, I remember they told her, "You can come up and you can sing, but you can't say anything between the songs." And I watched this kind of thing happen to her over the years, and it just so frustrated me that she clearly had a gift, and it was fine if she got up and sang all the things that she wanted to say, but there were these such strange restrictions in my mind about what she was allowed to do if God had called her to it. And so she raised me with the belief that whatever God called me to do, that I could do it. Like if God is the one calling you, who could stand against you? And now, having said that, all right, so then coming to the point where, I've been was raising up into leadership within Wycliffe, and I did not at any point until this particular moment, I did not aspire to be a CEO. In fact, it really wasn't until I was starting to move into the early years of executive leadership that I realized, I really know how to do this, and I think I have a gift for it, and so let's just keep leaning into that and seeing where God takes it. And then there was a search process that I was a part of at one point for a CEO role, and in that process, someone else had nominated me, and so I was brought into the process, unexpectedly, and it really caused me to have to start to wrestle with, could God be calling me at some point to serve in a CEO position? And so prior to that, I didn't aspire to it, but after that, I realized, okay, if God does call me to it, I believe I can do it. And that was the first place where I started to experience some pushback on my gender, where there were concerns of, if I were to be the one that was selected, would churches not want to support us? Would we get a lot of pushback from the church in that? And here's what's interesting is now, having been in this role for a little bit over a year, I have not experienced that. I wondered, stepping into this, particularly American Bible Society, this is, we're interconfessional. We work with really any biblically orthodox church, and I wondered if I would get some mail, if we would get people that would want to meet with me. I have not seen any of that. In fact, I've actually seen a tremendous amount of support, and I hope that the example that I'm able to set by being in this position is that we don't have to be afraid to put women into positions of leadership. These fears that something might happen, that someone might not like it, we don't have to go in with the belief that that's where we start the conversation. Actually, we're going to probably see more support than we're going to see negative pushback. And sure, there may be churches that don't want to work with us because of me, and I'm sad if that's true, because I feel like we're missing out on an opportunity of blessing by being able to partner together. Boy, I wish we could press towards unity on the things that we can agree with,
Totally.
the common things about who Jesus is, and just agree to disagree on some of those other things, because actually our disagreement is keeping more people from Christ than just about anything.
I think that we hear the voice of Jesus way more clearly in places of tension if it's healthy and honoring. The challenge is, I don't think the church has been good at facilitating tension. I think we'd rather play don't ask, don't tell, or blind agreement, or follow the leader, and not actually equip people to wrestle with hard things. And I think the gap in the church today, I believe we're in a bit of a theological crisis in the local church today, because people haven't been equipped to wrestle with the all the stuff culture's throwing at them. Because it's just been kind of, well, this is what we believe. It's not why, how, and it's okay if you disagree. It's
Yes.
because you go to this church, the assumption is blank. And then everybody just either pretends that that's the assumption for them or it is. But either way, it's not a robust way of engaging with the world.
Yes, I think there are two things that really damage our ability to have those conversations. I think one is this idea of just believe, but don't talk, but let's not have a conversation around it. There's no curiosity. And so then if you follow that train, what happens, and this is what you see with a lot of deconstruction now, is the moment that something gets, someone's world gets rocked around one point in what they've been told to just believe and not question, if they start to question, then they feel like their only option is to completely deconstruct. And sometimes that causes them to leave the church. Whereas if we can believe that our God, our faith, our Bible are able to handle our questions and to handle our curiosity and our wrestling, then it actually, I think, would keep more people in the church. So I think that's a critical one. You know, I think the other piece that really makes it hard for us is this idea of Christian niceness, that it's more important to be nice. And so it's very surface level and shallow, and we don't know how to handle conflict in a healthy and a biblical way. And so it's okay to have some things of tension and to dialogue, and it doesn't have to become personal animosity with one another.
Yeah, 100%. And I think it's often women in senior roles that I find to be the most sophisticated in understanding, navigating tension and conflict in ways that are honest but preserve harmony, because they've had to do that their entire career in places most men often haven't necessarily felt or had to address. Everybody addresses conflict, but I think for women in senior roles of leadership, especially in faith-based organizations, the stuff they've had to navigate is just so much more complex and often hurtful, frankly.
Yeah, there's definitely some of that. And the more I've been in leadership, the more that I have learned I'm actually better off if I lean into those moments. And I know lean in is like, oh, it's such a buzzword right now, but literally actually take a step into that conversation that feels uncomfortable, because when you do that and you say, you know what, let's not leave it here. Let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's unpack that a little bit more. That I find the outcomes are much better than if I back off and don't have the conversation.
Yeah, clarity is always better than agreement. I would much rather be clear than agree with you. Because sometimes I think when we have a lack of clarity, it creates a more toxic situation than when you see something as it truly is, and it's not that big of a deal. Oh, well, I disagree with that, but we're still cool, right?
Yes.
But sometimes a lack of clarity creates an ogre out of an issue that really isn't more. It's more of a dwarf. And anyways, okay. Let's talk about then your HR years. So you're at Wycliffe. By the way, is it Wycliffe or Wycliffe?
It is Wycliffe. Unless you're in the South, then it's Wycliffe.
That must be it, because I was just at a gathering called Edgewater, and there was somebody there from Wycliffe, and he said Wycliffe. So then I started saying Wycliffe, but I wanted to say Wycliffe, but now I'm hearing
it's officially it's Wycliffe.
Okay. I honestly, I should know that given my career path, and yet I was so thrown. Okay, good. I'll call it Wycliffe. So you're in a role that is very human resources, right? You went from kind of I think a PM into more HR space, director of human resources, VP for personnel. You were essentially the CHRO.
Yes.
For Wycliffe. Did you fall in love with the space of people management, organizational culture? Because that you spent a long time in that role, in that kind of milieu.
I think what I really enjoyed about my human resources years was I really love, I'm a strategist at heart. And I love figuring out how are we going to get to where we're trying to go. And if I can help work on the people side to help people to make that journey to get them where they need to go, I find that very satisfying. So, and I was good at the legal compliance. I was good at at managing the processes. But what I really enjoyed most was understanding the other person or the team, and then figuring out, okay, what did they need? How do we work with them to help them to get them to keep moving forward in the direction that is good for them, whether it's personally it's good for them or for the organization that it's good for the organization. So I found that really fun, and it really allowed me to practice strategy at a small level and then grow that over time as I would move up. The other thing I really love is I do love data. I love being able to use data to understand it, to dig into it and figure out what it's telling us. And you can get a lot of really interesting information when you, not just from counting the people that you have, but really collecting their understandings, their opinions, and using that to help shape your understanding of the world. So that was really helpful as well.
I can see why you continued beyond the CHRO and didn't just feel content to stay there, because similar to you, my danger zone is because I am such a strategist. Strategy is always number one on the Strengths Finder. I can see people as a chessboard instead of as individuals who I need to have empathy for, right? But at the same time, as a brand strategist and as somebody working in this space of fundraising and branding, if you don't start and end those conversations with people, they're the soil that everything's planted in, right? So
Yes.
for any strategist, CEO, COO, CDO, whatever it might be, people are the soil that everything you're hoping to accomplish grows out of, right?
That's
So
right.
having an understanding, I can imagine how all that time in HR was so helpful to equipping you for understanding that core piece of your role, your ministry.
Yes. And I think because of some of my history, both my family history and then just some other relational things that happened in my life, I think it gave me a lot of empathy, a lot of compassion for people. And so that really helped temper how I worked with people as I helped them to adapt to different strategic things. And I also continued to see the ultimate sovereignty of God, whether it was for the organization or for that person's life, and recognizing that even when decisions were hard, even when it meant that we were going to ask somebody to go through a hard thing because of an organizational decision or because of a personal decision that they had made, that ultimately I had to trust that God was working things out for the best for that person and for the organization. And knowing that God was ultimately in control and I could turn those things over to him and trust him to see it through to the end that needed to happen, that gave me a lot of peace about some of that as well.
Let's shift to the mom side of the equation. So you had this egalitarian mom who said, you can do anything you feel called or purposed to do. Clearly that has shaped you and I think contributed to who you are today and the decisions that you've made and the opportunities that you've seized. Your path has not been linear, but more like mine, kind of opportunity leads to opportunity leads to opportunity. Who would have guessed? Who would have thought? And you're hopefully some degree of hustle and hard work is accompanying you on this,
Yes.
meandering journey. But you're also married and you have kids. And,
Yes.
there are many people who would say, well, you as that fundamentalist raised, you should be home. You should be right. That's not an uncommon narrative. How have you navigated boundaries and professional work that clearly has scaled a ladder that often can be difficult to balance life and kids and family? What's that looked like for you? How have you managed that tension?
Yeah, that's a great question. Early on, right after I had my first daughter, and in the early years, my husband and I both worked with Wycliffe, and so our oldest daughter was in daycare for a little bit at the beginning. And I remember I was talking to someone, and they said, "Oh, well, who's with your daughter?" And there was a part of me, a terrible part of me, that wanted to say, "Oh, we're letting her be raised by wolves," like as though we hadn't thought of something like that. She was just,
she'll be fine. Yeah.
like early on in her life, I really wrestled with that because I did feel some guilt around that, and yet she really thrived in that environment for a number of years. And then when our second daughter was born, and this was really a gift to us, and I don't think it's the only way that it can work. So my husband had his own challenging things that happened as he was growing up. Out of that experience, he felt called when my second daughter was born to stay home with them. And he wanted to make sure that they had a different kind of life than what he had. And so he stepped out of his role. And then over the years, he's stepped in and out, just depending on the season of life that we're in, schooling wise, and the age of the girls. And has served or has stayed home. That has been a huge gift to us because, I've been traveling significantly for my work since they were very small. And having him there as that constant presence so that we never have to figure that out. I can, if I've got to commit to a trip, then I can go, and I know that he's got everything handled. But then, when I am home, I do have some hard boundaries around how I handle my life to make sure that we are getting as much time as we can together, because I know this time is limited, that my oldest is about to graduate from high school. And so, we want to maximize that time. So I have hard boundaries for myself around when I finish my work each day, what I do on the weekends, really trying to make sure I'm preserving that space for family and for church ministry and those other things, because I am not just the work that I've been called to do. I am also a human being that I am being in Christ, and so I believe that I'm meant to be holistically approaching those things and allowing God to work out the rest.
I love that answer, and I also love that you model non-traditional roles, and it has worked. I mean,
yes,
it's awesome, right? Like, I think we need more of that in quote unquote conservative or fundamental, Christian spaces, and examples of people who are doing that. I very similar story, but with my wife and me in terms of my career and her career in law, which has always paid better than ministry for some crazy reason. Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about the organizational side of that. Often I talk with leaders who have really been intentional about work-life boundaries, but they've done it just with constant friction and pushback from the organization who would demand more of them, especially if you're in that C-suite role. Do you feel like you've been in organizations that have allowed you to cultivate those boundaries, or has that been a place where you've had to lead up, you've had to push back, you've had to say no, it's created tension? I mean, how's that looked in terms of your career journey, maintaining those boundaries?
So, thankfully, I have not experienced a lot of friction around that. I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is I know just energy-wise and output-wise, I'm a very high-capacity person. So that's a blessing that I get to bring to this that not everyone will be able to bring to a role like this. And so a lot of times, what I hear more in like my current board, they're so kind. They're more worried that I'm doing too much, and I have to keep saying it's okay. Like I've got the capacity for this. So one thing that really was helpful for me starting off was after I had my first daughter. I was working with my boss at Wycliffe, and we were trying to figure out just like how could we make this work, because they were really missing me. They were hoping I could come back, and we were still working through some things. And my boss at that time, he encouraged me to bring my daughter with me. He said, "Just bring her with you," and so I did. And that actually started a practice that became a policy where we allowed moms and dads to bring their babies to the office up to about 8 months or walking, just for safety purposes. And it became this huge blessing for the organization because people loved having the office babies, and people would fight over who gets to hold the baby while mom goes to a meeting, or the baby would come to the meeting. And, and it was actually a wonderful, very family-friendly, family-oriented experience. And I'm so grateful for that boss that I have. David Snyder was his name. And I'm so grateful that he gave me the permission to try that out, to see how it worked, because it opened up the opportunity for so many other moms and dads to get to experience that.
Yeah, that is, there are so many wonderful stories throughout corporate America and the nonprofit space, just like that, where somebody brought their kid in or took a phone call when the camera was rolling, and just they become those moments of we're real people, right?
Yes.
There's a reality to our leadership and to whatever chief means that doesn't take away from the fact that we all live the same types of lives when we're home. We all clean up dirty things.
That's right. Well, and I think especially in the faith industry, in ministry, we have to remember that we are working with people who are made in the image of Christ, who are not just the work that they put out. Like, this has to be about more than just that. So, and that, we still need to have healthy policies and things like that. But let's not forget that people are whole people, and God created them that way, and He's given them those families. And if they're dealing with health issues or elder care or childcare, like, those are all things that God has placed into their lives. So let's have compassion for that and figure out how to work together around that.
One of the reasons the culture work I do is so precious and important to me is because I find in the nonprofit space, and I hate to say it, but the faith-based nonprofit space even worse, there's a presumption on health of culture. And the presumption, I think, is there because it's like, well, we're all doing the same thing for similar theology. We're all in this mission together. And like, of course we're healthy. How could we not be healthy? And I would argue, no. You're in the environment that's the most prone to be unhealthy because everybody's just presuming they're healthy. You're not intentional about it because you don't feel like you have to be until everybody's burned out, bleeding out, acting out, doing all these.
Yes.
I would argue if any organization needs to be intentional about its culture, all the layers of culture, it's the faith-based nonprofit because it's just the place where things just get the wonkiest the fastest.
I totally agree. I think it can be too easy for us to take advantage of one another in a nonprofit situation. And there's a lot of pressures, right? In nonprofits, you feel the pressure of, there's always financial pressure. There's always, and even if you feel like you have the money you wanted to have in the moment, there's that pressure of, are we doing what the donors are expecting of us to do with our time? There's the people that you're serving through that nonprofit. And, if you stay in this work long-term, you're doing it because your heart is for those people that we're serving. But we have to watch one another for burnout, that you can love yourself, love other people right into burnout if you're not careful. And so how are we together staying healthy? Because the goal is to do this for the long run, to serve more people over more time. If we just all burn out, if we kill each other with bad culture, that is not doing anybody any good in the long run.
And it's not normal for your place of employment to also be a place where you're expected to sacrifice for the mission. So it's not only professional, it's missional. Like there's an expectation that you give or sacrifice or care deeply, but then it's also spiritual.
Yes.
So your theology or framework on Jesus or life or God, that matters. You can't just change it and then expect that not to have professional implications.
That's right.
But then number 4, there's often volunteer donor pressure where everybody has an opinion and you're navigating that. Like General Electric doesn't have these pressures. They don't,
Right.
There's nobody's sacrificing for GE. They don't care what your position is theologically. There's no volunteers, right? It's like it's a different. Yeah. So anyways, I think the work that you do is probably the most culturally complex for all of those reasons. Okay. So you're in this role at Wycliffe, and now let's move into American Bible Society. So today you're president and CEO since I believe February of last year. So
yes.
you've been there for roughly 1 year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
12 and a half months in? No, 12.2, whatever it would be. What was that journey like? What caused you to not just stay after 22 years at Wycliffe and enjoy a long career there? And what made you move into the president CEO role? What was the opportunity or the prompting or the calling?
If you've been following the Bible translation world, there are some alliances that have come together around the progress and the acceleration of the work. And we were doing some projections on 2033, which is one of these goals that we've set together, where the whole, the task will not be completed, but a lot of progress will have been made by this 2033 date. And I was doing some projections, trying to think about what did Wycliffe need to look like in 2034. And as I was working through that process, I felt a strong prompting from the Lord that Wycliffe was not going to be the end of my career. And I was a little taken aback by that because I was very happy with what I did. I felt good at what I did. I love Bible translation. And so I couldn't imagine what that next thing could be, but I just kind of said, okay, I'll just trust and I'll wait and see. And, there's something else I came across the other day that happened a little bit later that year. We were in a session of actually a Lead Like Jesus workshop, and they gave us these different cards. And I had forgotten about this, but I had kept it in my wallet. The card that I got said this. It said, "I am preparing a place for you," and you're supposed to put your name into that space. So I held onto that card, and I thought, okay, like this is like sign number 2. There's something happening here, but I don't know what it is. And I had been following American Bible Society from afar. Many people had. It's an organization that went through 5 to 6 years of significant hard times, a lot of leadership transitions. It's all been very public. So, it's been a nice article in Christianity Today about some of that. And looking in from the outside and seeing what seemed like a lot of chaos, I had even told people I think somebody would have to be crazy to take on that role because it just seemed like, wow, how could you feel comfortable stepping into that and not knowing what you're getting into? And yet, in August of that year, the search profile for the position came out. And I was just really curious. And so I pulled it up to see what in the world they could be looking for. And there were 3 components that jumped out to me, and it really made me feel like it had been written for me. It was focused on strategy, strategic planning, operational excellence, which I had been practicing for years, and innovation methodology, which was a part of my doctorate program. And 3 things I was very passionate about. And I had this moment where I thought, uh-oh. I said, God, are you really asking me to put my name in for this? And he really sat me down and he made me think about the parable of the sower. And I started to imagine what the world would look like, what the U.S. could look like, what ABS could look like if it really lived out a vision of coming alongside that gardener in the parable of the sower and making sure the seed was available, making sure the soil was prepared, that the barriers were taken down, and that the harvest could be plentiful. And I started to get kind of excited. And so I put my name in, and I really thought, if nothing else, I'll just be really honest with what I see and what I think. And then if I'm the right person, I will have been very honest about it all along. And if I'm not the right person, at least I've shared my perspective. But as I went through the process, as I got to know the board, we were really in step about what we were thinking about the future for ABS. That became clear the further we went into the process. And before I knew it, they had asked me to step into the role. And so, yeah, I was, again, kind of an unexpected step in my journey. And yet now that I'm here, I see how all the pieces fit together. And I love that I have gotten to take the love that I had for Bible translation, but I now get to extend it into the full life cycle of Bible ministry, really thinking about people's journey from that moment of first access all the way through to where not only are they being transformed by the Bible, but they're turning around and helping others to be transformed as well. So I love that I get to think about the whole journey. And now I hope I get to do this the rest of my life.
Talk about the shadow that you entered into. Often in legacy organizations that are changing the top of the leadership, there's often a significant shadow or expectation based on the previous role. Do you feel some of that pressure or tension or do you feel freedom to lead in a new way? And what is the shadow that you're coming into and ultimately now defining a new culture, a new way of leading that's rooted in who you are?
I was the 7th CEO in about 6 years. And so
very small shadows.
Well, so the shadow was, a real complete
nobody
lack.
Stays.
And a complete lack of clarity. There had been a lot of staff turnover. And so, there was lack of clarity about who the organization was meant to be, what our identity was supposed to be. How do we take this 208-year-old legacy of, amazing Bible distribution? What does that need to look like for the future? And so in many ways, even though there was that shadow of all this transition and turnover and lack of clarity, I feel like because you had this broken season, it could be hard to turn or to change a 200-year-old organization. It could be hard to change an 80-year-old organization because you've got the weight of all of that legacy. And you never want to lose the thread, right? You like that thread of the founders, that needs to carry through for why you exist. But to get to where you are relevant and really meeting the needs of today, I think the gift I was given is that brokenness in that season, because it allowed me to come in and to work with the folks that were left, and then to bring in some new people with some fresh energy and some fresh ideas, and to begin to imagine, how do we take this beautiful legacy and turn it into something that is truly relevant and we could build, because there was a lot of rubble. So we spent a lot of our last year building those foundations, getting clarity on our identity, building up the structures that needed to be repaired. And, we're coming to the end of this initial building season, and we have a 3-year strategic plan where we're looking to the future, and we're super excited about what we think God is calling us into. So it has been, there's been challenge to it, and there are still many days where, as a team together, and we are together as a team. It's like we're like, okay, pull hard like to make this turn. But we see where we're headed, and it is super exciting.
When you think about the cultural building that you're doing, I imagine trust and establishing trust. And I look at trust through the lens of relational trust, meaning goodwill, caring for people, seeing people as people, but then also functional trust, performance, delivery, right person, right job. Do you feel like you've been in, for this first year, in a unique season of regaining trust, establishing trust, clarifying what it means to trust one another?
That has definitely been a part of it. I think some part that has been really helpful for me is just personality-wise. I tend to be a pretty open communicator. I worked in HR. I know when things need to be confidential. But for the most part, if it's not confidential, if it doesn't need to be held tightly, I'd prefer to share things with people and allow them to enter into the dialogue with us and help us to figure it out together. And so I started that practice very early on when I came in here. I think that helped to dispel a lot of myths, questions. It cut down on the rumors that can happen when there's ambiguity. And then it's just been a matter of working together to deliver one piece after the next. We're going to work on this. We deliver it. We did what we said we're going to do. And we're just going to keep doing that piece by piece by piece. That accountability is really important. And, and actually as a whole team right now, our leadership team is working through 5 Dysfunctions of a Team from Patrick Lencioni. And we're going to be doing some assessment to see how we are across the organization now in those different levels to keep building into that, to build the trust, the ability to have healthy conflict and really have accountability and produce results together.
Yeah, I think 2 of the most common trust busters I see in the faith-based nonprofit just time and time again are triangulation. Like, it's often well-meaning triangulation, but it's triangulation nonetheless. And then just not dragging issues into the daylight, which is, I think, what you just described, right? Transparency, let's just talk about things, lean into the issue, and then realize maybe it's not as scary and big as we thought it was.
Yes. So with triangulation, one of my main tactic for that is once I realize it's happening, let's just all get in a room together and talk it out.
Yeah, exactly.
And I also have found with the second issue, God has given me the gift of putting the awkward thing on the table. It just doesn't bother me to say the awkward thing that nobody wants to talk about. And so sometimes I just lay the bomb in the middle of the table and say, okay, this is happening. I see this happening. I see us not talking about it. So let's deal with it.
Do you think these attributes of your leadership style, this is clearly who you are, right? It's not like you invented this for the role you're in
That's
today.
Right.
Was that a significant part of the hiring process? I have to imagine a lot of the discussions that you had during the interview process were around these types of things.
I think it was a mix of some of the the specifics that we talked about, but also them just experiencing me in this way too. I'm the same person that I was in the search process, so they knew what they were going to get.
Well, let's talk about a couple of things. First, you said innovation is close to your heart. It was a big part of your focus intellectually in your study. I often look at innovation as a proactive posture. A lot of people thought they were innovative because they reacted to COVID and survived.
Yes.
I think adaptation is important, but not always innovation. Innovation, in my mind, is proactive. How do you understand innovation, and what role does innovation play in your leadership and in the organization that you're leading?
Yeah, so I was really trained. So I have a doctorate in strategic leadership that I got through Regent University, which I'm a big fan of. They were amazing in terms of their commitment to our progress in that, and to really seeing us gain the skills both professionally but also spiritually to grow along the way. And a big part of that was innovation methodology around human-centered design. And I found that to be an extremely attractive way to approach innovation. I know it's not the only way, but I think because it speaks again to what God is doing in people, and then how we can uncover that and bring that to light. And so to me, I actually want to see American Bible Society have innovation as a regular practice that we do all the time. And in fact, we've actually named a chief innovation officer specifically for this purpose.
Nice.
And we're beginning to build this methodology into the organization. And I want everybody to at least have a base level of training on it, because I think the practices are good, whether it's continuous improvement for what you're doing and really getting that feedback about how well we're serving people. But it also leads us to the bigger questions. What are the, as we look at the next 3 years, we're really focused on engaging with the U.S. church, with the next generation, particularly Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and digital presence technology. How do we keep, porting more things into that and really using that effectively? And at the center of all three of those things, we need to really understand what are the unmet needs that are out there. We're not trying to replicate what's already out there. We don't need to create redundant things. What are those unmet needs, maybe even that people or churches can't articulate, that we can help draw out, and then we can help serve. Our whole goal is we want to be able to serve in those places that aren't being met, especially for those under-resourced churches. Mega churches, they're wonderful and they have all these great resources. They have great capacity. They can develop new things. But we have a strong heart for those small churches that are they're trying to get by day to day. They're trying to figure out how to get their congregations more engaged with God's word. And if we can come alongside and help them and help others who are in that space, we want to be able to serve. And the best way that we can do that is really listening and understanding what the needs are, where they're coming from, and then design according to that, and then test it to see how it works. Yeah. I think it should be natural practice for what we do.
Yeah, that whole mindset of HCD and kind of sprint design thinking has been revolutionary to our approach, and all of it ties back to empathy for the end user, right?
Yes.
I mean, that having true, I was just speaking to a group of AI, quants and wonks. They laughed at that, but that's what they are, right? And they're like, oh yeah, HCD, empathy for the end user. But then you start asking them questions about how they're applying empathy, and they're like, they're not. Like this, yes. It's just a phrase or a mantra, but it doesn't necessarily shape their processes, right? So yeah, I think what you're describing is that perfectly, and I think it's so critical for faith-based. It's awesome.
Well, and just yesterday, our team was talking about an article that just came out in Harvard Business Review, where they were talking about why people are going to AI, and some of the top reasons they're going to AI are for these meaning, purpose, relationship kinds of things. And so empathy's got to be a part of this. We've got to figure out the part that plays. As we think about how we use AI as a tool, it's a wonderful tool. Let's figure out how that plays into the full incarnational experience of what it means to live out our faith.
And when the mission field is changing so rapidly, contextualization and living on mission changes. So
yes.
I love it. I did a lot of work with a church in Seattle, and I remember saying to the board, hey, how different is Seattle today than 30 years ago? They're like, oh my gosh, so different. And then I was like, how different is your church than it was 30 years ago? And they're like,
it's hard. It's hard to commit to that kind of change. But I think it's necessary.
Yeah, it's disruptive, and it's often the opposite. It's antithetical to what people want from church, which is stability, predictability, yes. Safety, right? And now we're saying, actually, we're going to be more disruptive than you ever wanted for the sake of the mission.
That's right.
Okay, so last question. You're in a, and by the way, we can cover whatever you want, but I want to be honoring of your time. We're right at the hour. You're in a room of CEOs. You're talking to, I'm sure you've been in this room before, you're talking to senior leaders, many of whom listen to this show. What is it you would want to tell them? What's the most important kind of conviction from your heart that you would want to convey to them in this opportunity that you have to influence them?
If I'm talking to CEOs who are in a place of faith, then what I would want them to start with is, let's remember who really owns the work that we're doing. And we need to make sure that we might have the title of CEO, but we need God to be the one in the driver's seat. We need to be the one, coming to him for his leadership. We're a first follower as we follow after him. And so if we do that, if we're listening to him, if we're trusting in him, if we're turning our challenges over to him, he is going to provide for us, and he's going to lead us to what he wants us to do with the mission that we've been entrusted with. For those who maybe aren't in that place of faith yet, and I would say you're on a journey. Don't worry. We would love to help you think about that journey. But I think back to some of the things that we talked about in terms of culture. This is really critical. I think the openness and transparency, the willingness to listen to your staff, to really hear what's happening in your organization and allow that to help shape and guide your thinking. And the ability to listen and hear what's outside of you and how that needs to speak in to where you're headed, what decisions you're making. I think the more that we can all practice that good listening, good responsiveness, that taking all that information in and allowing that to help shape all the stuff that goes on in our heads, then we're going to be much better leaders if we do that.
For more stories from experts in the industry and to learn how to take your nonprofit into the future, like this video, subscribe to our channel and podcast, and visit makehistoric.com/insights. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Ted Vaughn, and this is Future Nonprofit.